give God thanks for blessing me with opportunities like this one to continue serving the people of East Basseterre and by extension the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. As we advance the development of our beloved country of St. Kitts and Nevis. Mr. Speaker, the Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2018 before this Honorable House, I believe as well is a non-controversial bill. So perhaps we'll get to lunch pretty early and amend and move on pretty early as well, adjourn rather pretty early as well, Mr. Speaker. Being a little bit presumptuous, I suspect from the look of your face, Mr. Speaker.
Matters like that in your good hands.
But it's a bill, Mr. Speaker, to amend the Vehicles Road Traffic Act, Cap 15.06. Mr. Speaker, it is intended that this bill would provide clarification on a particular interpretation within the existing piece of legislation, also to address other matters, including the improved or enhanced oversight of vehicle inspection facilities, along with the requirement to produce one's driver's license when asked to do so by any member of the Royal St. Christopher and Nevis Police Force. Mr. Speaker, the act that is being amended today refers to the licensing authority as such a person, persons, or authority as the minister appoints by order to be the licensing authority for the registration and licensing of vehicles, and generally for the purposes of this act. And such licensing authority shall be subject to such general or specific direction as the minister may give. The current legislation or principal act, Mr. Speaker, stipulates that it shall be the duty of the licensing authority to, amongst other things, to regulate and control traffic on the roads, to keep records of accidents or all accidents that should be on the roads, and to furnish annually to the minister a report of all accidents on roads which result in death, injury to persons, and as far as practicable, the causes attributed to such accidents. Also to keep a driver's offenses register and to enforce the provisions of this Act and any regulations made thereunder. Mr. Speaker, the Principal Act under Section 3 or Section 4, subsection 3 says that the licensing authority may authorize such persons as it considers necessary to be inspectors for the purpose of inspecting motor vehicles in accordance with the Act and any regulations made thereunder. A person appointed or authorized by the licensing authority to be an inspector beg your pardon, shall inspect any motor vehicle or trailer and issue a certificate in such form as the minister may prescribe. The section continues, Mr. Speaker, to which the licensing authority may designate members of the police force to be licensing officers and examining officers for carrying out the provisions of the Act or any regulations thereunder. But we are here today, Mr. Speaker, to amend that section. And the amendment or Section 4 of the Principal Act is being amended by the immediate insertion of subsections 6, 7, and 8, which read as follows. The licensing authority may grant authorization for a person to become an inspector for the purposes of subsection 3 upon A, receipt of a letter of application accompanied by a fee prescribed by the minister in the regulations, and or B, satisfactory compliance with the guidelines for inspection and inspection facilities as may be prescribed by the minister in regulations. Section 7 or subsection 7 to be inserted, Mr. Speaker, reads, where a person has been authorized to perform the duties of an inspector pursuant to subsection 3, and the inspector or his agents contravenes the provisions of this section, the person shall be liable, A, in the case of a first violation, be issued a warning, and B, in the case of a second or subsequent offense, the authorization may be withdrawn by the licensing authority. And subsection 8, which is being inserted, Mr. Speaker, states a licensing officer or an examining officer designated pursuant to subsections 5 and 6 shall be permitted to enter the premises where vehicles are being inspected or are proposed to be inspected by an inspector for the purpose of verifying and monitoring the inspection process. And one may ask, Mr. Speaker, why are these subsections being inserted? Why are they necessary? According to the advice received by the ministry, the aim is to ensure that vehicle inspectors do what they are, according to the law, expected to do. Inspect vehicles in accordance with the Traffic Act, regulations, and established guidelines to certify that these vehicles are roadworthy, having gone through the inspection process. I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, many of us would see vehicles on the road and ask ourselves, how did they receive a certificate of roadworthiness? Vehicles we will call in our small days jalopy vehicles, but they are licensed, Mr. Speaker. And we do very believe or concur with the advice of the licensing authority that there must be some penalty or penalties for non-compliance to the regulations and or legislation, Mr. Speaker. Because it has been reported that some inspectors have embarked on a practice to issue certificates of inspection without inspecting the vehicles, and in some cases issue the certificate even when the vehicle is not roadworthy. And this has to be a clear violation of the Act, Mr. Speaker. This has to be a recipe for promoting unsafe practices or having unsafe vehicles on the road. Mr. Speaker, the bill before us as well seeks to amend Section 32 of the Act. And the principal legislation as it relates to the duties of licensing officers, Mr. Speaker, states quite clearly that it shall be the duty of the licensing officers on behalf of the licensing authority and in accordance with the provisions of the Act, A, to issue licenses and certificates of registration in respect of vehicles, driver's licenses, and conductor's licenses. B, to keep a register of registered motor vehicles, licensed motor vehicles and trailers, and licensed motor drivers and licensed conductors, and to perform all sorts of the duties as are or may be conferred or imposed upon him or her by this or any other acts or by any regulations made thereunder by the licensing authority. Mr. Speaker, the amendment to Section 32, Mr. Speaker, which in its present form states that a person shall be disqualified for holding or obtaining a driver's license if he or she is by a conviction under this Act or by any order of the court thereunder disqualified for holding or obtaining a license. B, in respect of a motor vehicle if he or she is under 16 years. C, in respect of any other motor vehicle other than a public service vehicle, if he or she is under 18 years. And D, if he or she is suffering from any disease or other disability which, in the opinion of the licensing authority, would be likely to cause the driving of a motor vehicle by him or her to be a source of danger to the public. Provided, it says, Mr. Speaker, if a license is refused by virtue of this provision, the application or the applicant may claim to be subjected to a test as to his or her fitness or ability to drive a motor vehicle or a motor vehicle of a particular class or description, or a motor vehicle of a particular form of construction, and if he or she passes such tests and is not otherwise disqualified, the license shall not be refused by reason only of the provision of this paragraph. Mr. Speaker, the Section 32 of the Act is now being amended by the immediate insertion of subsection E, which states as follows, Mr. Speaker: in the absence of any evidence to the contrary, if the person defaults more than 1 month in payment of a fixed penalty pursuant to the provisions of Section 85, Mr. Speaker, and until such time as the penalty is paid. Now, Section 85, Mr. Speaker, relates to the certificate of payment and non-payment of fixed penalty. And it states, in any proceedings, a certificate that payment of the fixed penalty was or was not made to the clerk of the magistrate by a date specified in the certificate shall, if the certificate purports to be signed by the clerk, be sufficient evidence of the fact stated unless the contrary is proved. Mr. Speaker, we are also advised at the ministry that this would provide an incentive for violators to settle their traffic tickets expeditiously. We are also advised, Mr. Speaker, that currently some offenders only pay their tickets after court proceedings have commenced and they receive a summons. The fine at this point is the same at the time when the ticket is or was issued. This amendment will therefore be concur with the traffic authority or the license authority. It would make it more economical, if I can use that term, Mr. Speaker, to pay the ticket on time and save the police and judicial time. It also automatically disqualifies drivers from driving by the Inland Revenue Department, denying the renewal of their driver's license if their records show outstanding payments for traffic tickets. During this time, Mr. Speaker, or during such time as any driver's license is suspended, the holder thereof shall be disqualified for holding or obtaining a driver's license. And the final amendment, Mr. Speaker, refers to an amendment to or of Section 37 of the Principal Act, which is under the caption Production of Driver's License. And the Principal Act stipulates that the driver of or the amendment rather stipulates, Mr. Speaker, that the driver in Section 1, subsection 1, 37, subsection 1, the driver of a motor vehicle shall, on being required by any member of the police force, immediately produce his or her driver's license for examination so as to enable such member of the police force to ascertain the name and address of the holder of the license and the date of issue of the same, and if he or she fails so to do, he or she shall be liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $250. This, in fact, Mr. Speaker, amends the Principal Act as I speak and increases the fine from $150 to $250, Mr. Speaker. And the Principal Act, I should have stated before as well, gave or speaks to a provision of your license within 48 hours after the production of his or her license was required. The holder produces the license in person at such police station as may be specified to him or her at the time its production was required, or he shall be charged of or charged under the section. And this section was originally Section 38, amended by Act 7 of 1976 and 9 of 1986. Mr. Speaker, the authorities have also apprised us that presently drivers, as earlier mentioned, are required to produce their license within 48 hours at a specified police station. But this allows for persons who do not have a valid driver's license or may not have a license at all at the time they were stopped by the police to continue driving for at least 48 hours, Mr. Speaker. After which time they may never appear at a police station as requested and may have given a false name and address to the police. So that then means that the police will now have to look for such persons, expending time unnecessarily, time and resources, Mr. Speaker. The amendment will therefore allow the police to establish the identity of drivers immediately and determine whether or not they have a valid driver's license, thereby saving investigative time. Mr. Speaker, as well, non-nationals driving on a temporary license, or OECS drivers license holders may leave the country within 2 days if they do not have a driver's license. Again, the driver will be allowed to continue to drive without police knowing whether or not they have a driver's license. Since, Mr. Speaker, as it stands, a temporary license does not display a photo or a photograph, a photo ID, or the foreign driver's license. So if it has a photo, then it should be presented to confirm identity. The police have reported cases, Mr. Speaker, especially foreign students sharing temporary driver's licenses. 3 students, you understand, lived in an apartment, and all 3 use the same license. So, Mr. Speaker, this act is to eliminate all these anomalies, if I can use that term, traffic anomalies, Mr. Speaker. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the amendment, as I said earlier, speaks to clarification of the interpretation, Mr. Speaker. And in the Principal Act, under interpretation, the Principal Act, the Vehicles, Road and Traffic Act, Cap 15.06, it, under interpretation, speaks to traffic sign. And it says, and I quote, traffic sign means any object, device, marking, symbol, signal, or lettering, whether fixed or portable, for indicating to traffic on a road or to any particular class of traffic, warnings, information, requirements, restrictions, or prohibitions of any description, and a reference to the erection or placing of a traffic sign includes a reference to the display thereof in any manner whatsoever, whether or not, beg your pardon, involving fixing or placing. And this, Mr. Speaker, leads me into the area of our amendment to our regulations. And under the current regulations, and regulations under Section 77 of the Parent Act speaks to the minister's discretionary authority to make regulations. And under the current regulations, Mr. Speaker, under the 6th schedule of Section 77, short title, these regulations may be cited as the Vehicles and Road Traffic Regulations. And under Section 21, beg your pardon, subsection 1, it refers to traffic signs, and it says this, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, the licensing authority may cause or permit traffic signs to be placed by the Director of Public Works on or near any road. B, every person driving or propelling any vehicle shall conform to the indication given by any traffic sign. And Mr. Speaker, when these regulations or draft regulations went before the Attorney General's office, we heeded the advice of the Parliamentary Council, to which we should make it abundantly clear, especially in times like these when we are modernizing. The member from number 8 spoke to growth, but we are continual growth and modernizing of St. Kitts and Nevis, putting us up there, or really cementing us up there amongst the international countries, top international countries of the world, Mr. Speaker. So we have gone to traffic lights. Some people call them traffic signals. In technical balance, Mr. Speaker, these are signaling devices positioned at road sections, pedestrian crossings, and other locations to control flow of traffic. And in this case, Mr. Speaker, we have already installed these traffic signals and these traffic lights at intersections and pedestrian crossing signals at the junction of 4th and Kearn Streets and Victoria Road, that intersection, Mr. Speaker, along with or rather at the intersection at 4th Street and Bay Road, Mr. Speaker, as well as the intersection at Wellington Road, Kearn Street, and East Independence Square Street. But I dare say, Mr. Speaker, we are coming way behind countries in the world. As a matter of fact, it's over a century. Over 100 years ago, traffic lights were introduced. In London, for example, in 1868. In the USA, in 1917. Mr. Speaker, there are traffic lights in Anguilla, in St. Martin, in Antigua and Barbuda, in Grenada, in Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago. So we are catching up, Mr. Speaker, and we are modernizing, because we believe that these traffic lights will help to alternate the right of way according to users by displaying lights in some colors, or rather in standard colors like red, yellow, and green. That's unity. And that's following a universal color. In the typical sequence of colors, the green lights allow the traffic to flow, Mr. Speaker. The amber or yellow lights, Mr. Speaker, warns that the signal is about to change to red. And Mr. Speaker, if you see red, Mr. Speaker, you stop. You have to stop. Be careful. If you see red, danger ahead. If you see red, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at present, the traffic police in St. Kitts and Nevis still control the flow of traffic. And this continues over 100 years since this or such a technical or such technical advancement in other countries. Mr. Speaker, on the basis of a traffic study undertaken by ADB consultants, we have installed these lights at our busiest streets and intersections. These were not arbitrarily selected. They were selected and installed on the basis of a traffic study and traffic count some months ago. And Mr. Speaker, as I said, they are green for go, yellow for caution. As the lights change to red, you stop. And everyone knows that by now, Mr. Speaker. That at the traffic department, And we must give kudos to Inspector Keynes and Superintendent Cromwell Henry, who have been rather supportive of the government's efforts to modernize in this country, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the Director of Public Works, Cromwell Williams, and his team, who have conducted, or rather continue to conduct, town hall meetings at schools, in order to sensitize children about the use of pedestrian crossings in particular. Because, Mr. Speaker, primarily, the purpose of traffic lights is simply to facilitate the safe movement of cars and as such to avoid collisions. Mr. Speaker, we have on our roads well over 3,000 vehicles. I tried to get the Director of Inland Revenue to get the exact figures. 30,000. I said 30,000. 30,000, beg your pardon, Mr. Speaker. 30,000 vehicles on the road. And you could imagine, as the car carrier comes here, it seems every week that in years to come, not too far from now, if we don't address the traffic safety and traffic movements, then our roads may become chaotic, as it was in some countries before they introduced these traffic lights. Mr. Speaker, as I said, they help to reduce the number of accidents and make collisions at intersections a lot less frequent. Traffic lights will play a crucial and vital role when it comes to safety in our everyday lives. And the system used, it's an actuated timing used as a detector that is able to adjust itself to different traffic volumes. Coordinated time helps minimize starting and stopping at random, which helps traffic flow and is less likely to create a traffic jam. And Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me as well if I did not address the issue which came to the fore some weeks ago as relates to the hoarding in front of the National Museum. The hoarding, or in local language, as we say colloquially, the boarding up of that area, which we believe is important, but at the same time, it created a hazard for those pedestrians who were forced to move to the streets and expose themselves to injury by passing vehicles. We have since instructed the Director of Public Works, along with the Commissioner of Police, to have discussions with the representatives of the St. Christopher and Nevis National Trust. Mr. Speaker, I am advised, and I can report, that on Thursday, January 18, Thursday last, a meeting was held with the members of the trust and the representatives as just stipulated. And it was agreed that efforts would be made to expedite the movement of the hoarding to an overhead position so that pedestrian access to the sidewalk would be greatly improved while maintaining safety. It is expected, Mr. Speaker, that this will be done in 2 or 3 weeks, will be completed within 2 or 3 weeks. It is the view, Mr. Speaker, that the 2 areas which were opened in line with the pedestrian crossing in front of the trust have a minimal risk of falling debris. And this was also concurred with the construction advisor to the trust, Mr. Othniel Heiliger.
Honourable Member?
So, Mr. Speaker, I want to just wrap here right now. Can I?
Yes.
Yes, I want to wrap here right now, sir. And
I know you're about to wrap, but let's adjourn for lunch.
I can just say I will commend this bill to safe passage, Mr. Speaker. Can I?
Thank you. Honourable Member.
Stay up to date with news, programs, and activities of the government with SKNIS. Like us on Facebook. Listen to us on SoundCloud. Follow us on Twitter. And watch our videos on YouTube. Connect with us today. SKNIS, St. Kitts and Nevis Information Service.